Present. Board Member Bonta. Here. Board Member Becker. Here. Board Member Rowe.
Here.
Chair Lawrence.
Here. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready to begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much for that. Next, we'll move on to the approval of our agenda. Do we have any changes?
No chair. Well,
No
no,
changes.
we do not.
Great, so let's go ahead and move forward with our current agenda. And do we have any board comments and announcements? Well, I'll just say that I was able to make an announcement at our city council this week regarding our new response to costs and our program, our cost saving program. And I think that's been a good response so far. I saw that we had some press coverage of our cost saving program. So I just want to say thank you to staff for that. I think we've been able to get a positive response for that. And of course, we'll be rolling that out very effectively. Next, we'll move over into public comments. Very public comment first.
We don't have any public comments, but just as a reminder, please speak directly into your mic. Thank you.
All right, we will do that. Okay, next we'll move to the approval of the minutes. This was for the meeting on January 29th, 2026. Would I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Board Member Spelling. Board Member Nunez. Aye. Board Member Bonta. Aye. Board Member Becker.
Yes.
Board Member Figueroa. Board Member Chair Lawrence.
Yes. Great, now we will move on to our first presentation, State of Nuclear Industry. We have Mark Specht, is that right?
Specht.
Specht? He's joining us today.
He's coming in virtually.
Okay, virtually. Okay, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, and I think you all are running the slides on your side, if that's correct.
Yeah, we've got them up for you.
Okay, I think it's still coming through. Okay, there we go. Thanks. Okay, perfect. So thank you for inviting me today. I'm happy to speak about the nuclear power and the context in California. And just to say, if we can go to the next slide, just to say a bit about my organization before we get going, because I just want to be transparent about where my organization is coming from and how I'm approaching this topic. So next slide. The Union of Concerned Scientists, our organization was founded back in 1969 by MIT students and faculty who were, sorry, it's going through a lot of slides, but
You're very fast.
My apologies, this is not working.
okay. Get a preview of the whole presentation.
We're gonna get the slides up and running for you, but feel free to share the introduction as you have it in front of you.
Great, okay, thank you. So right, the organization was started back in the late 60s by students and faculty who were quite concerned about research funding that was pouring into nuclear weapons. And very understandably, these folks wanted to see science used to solve society's problems instead. And so UCS's work has really evolved over the decades, and it's now very focused on climate change mitigation and adaptation. But our roots in nuclear weapons and nuclear power plant safety have really stayed with us through the years. You could go to the next slide. Just more recently, as a new wave of nuclear reactor designs have been proposed, UCS has continued to assess the safety and security of these various types of reactors. So we've issued reports on small modular reactors, on advanced reactor designs, and in both cases, we raised significant concerns over safety and security of these reactors. But next slide. At the same time, we've also recognized the role that existing nuclear power plants play on the power grid, since they generate a large chunk of clean electricity for the country and also for California. And so we've advocated for policies that would keep existing nuclear power plants operating as long as they're safe. And that's really just to avoid a potential increase in global warming emissions that would come from nuclear power plant retirements. So, like, overall, UCS is cautious about nuclear power plant safety and security, but we're by no means an anti-nuclear organization. And it looks like the slide is up, the aerial view. I just wanted to say a bit about my work, which is focused in particular on the transition to clean electricity in the Western states and California in particular. And to the extent that nuclear comes up, it's mostly in energy planning spaces and, of course, all the debates around Diablo Canyon that we seem to love to have every few years or so. So anyways, that's about me and the organization. And if we can go to the next slide, I just want to say a bit about the historical context around nuclear in California, particularly the legislative context and that landscape. So on the next slide, California, the legislature passed a moratorium on nuclear power, on building new nuclear power plants back in 1976. I'm sure you all are aware of that. And the language of that ban effectively makes it so that new nuclear power plants cannot be built until there's a long-term solution to the nuclear waste issues. That being said, California did build 3 big nuclear power plants. I'm sure you know about this. Rancho Seco and San Onofre were 2 of those plants, and they were shut down in 1989 and 2013, respectively, both due to equipment failures. And Diablo Canyon is the 3rd plant, the only one that's left operating. And on the slide there, we have I think it's a pretty cool old-timey photo of the plant actually under construction. On the moratorium, though, we've seen recent legislative attempts to roll it back. In 2008, there was a bill that would have lifted the moratorium entirely and replaced it with less stringent requirements. More recently, in 2023, there was a bill that would have exempted small modular reactors in particular from the moratorium. And hot off the press, just last week, there's a 2026 bill that would exempt any advanced reactor with a design license that's approved by the NRC after 2005. But the moratorium remains in place for now. So going to the next slide, even with the moratorium on the books, we still have studies that shed light on the potential role that nuclear could play in decarbonizing the state's economy or the state's electricity system. And just temporarily setting aside any concerns about waste and safety and security, I'm going to come back to those. I just want to focus now on the potential role nuclear could play in decarbonizing the electricity system. So next slide. When I think about this question, I really think about whether nuclear could be part of a least cost portfolio of resources that's used to decarbonize the grid and maintain grid reliability. And to answer that kind of question, grid modeling tools, especially capacity expansion models, are one of the most helpful ways to understand whether nuclear is inexpensive enough to play that kind of role on the grid, to be to be part of the least cost decarbonization solution. And unsurprisingly, the answer to what extent nuclear is or is not part of that solution really depends heavily on the costs. So I'm just going to zoom in on that. If we go to the next slide. I'm just going to focus on a few different estimates of the cost of nuclear in terms of the levelized cost of energy, which is not a perfect metric. It leaves out some stuff, but it's helpful to have a standardized metric to compare costs across different types of resources, and this is one that's quite commonly used. So next, the first study I just want to point you towards is a Lazard 2024 estimate of the costs for new conventional nuclear being in the range between $142 and $222 per megawatt hour. And just for reference, the new nuclear power plant units at Vogtle down in Georgia, those came in, Lazard estimated those to be around $190 per megawatt hour. If we pull up the next bullet points, there was another study from the Idaho National Laboratory that looked at the costs of large reactors and small modular reactors after the costs have come down from widespread deployment. And they estimated that the cost for these reactors could come down to the range of $60 to $100 per megawatt hour. Again, that's after really technology refinements and widespread deployments. But currently, just as an example, the NuScale SMR project, the UAMPS project, without federal subsidies, the latest estimate was that would have come in around $119 per megawatt hour. But the project was canceled, so we don't actually know what the final cost of that project would have ended up being. So just in conclusion here, we're seeing prices, the levelized cost of energy for nuclear, we're seeing prices above $100 per megawatt hour, with some potential for that to come down over time. Okay, on the next slide, I just want to move to a few different studies, and with that information about the potential levelized cost of energy for different nuclear technologies, that's going to help us understand the results of a few different studies I'm going to talk through briefly. So yes, thank you. The first study I wanted to talk about was the California Energy Commission's SB 100 study in 2021. And as part of this study, they did a sensitivity where they looked at to what extent a clean, zero carbon, firm resource would contribute to decarbonizing the grid if it had a price around $60 per megawatt hour. So they weren't actually studying nuclear per se. Other technologies such as geothermal could also fit the bill here. So any technology with those characteristics and that price point is what they were looking at. And they actually found a huge build out of those resources at about 20 gigawatts. So basically what they were finding in that study is that if the price of nuclear or geothermal or some other similar resource were to come down that much to $60 per megawatt hour, it could play a huge role in the least cost decarbonization of the grid. The next study is a Union of Concerned Scientists study from 2023. This is actually a nationally focused study looking at getting the whole economy to net zero emissions by 2050. And in this study, new nuclear power plants were an option, and we assumed the levelized cost of energy would be around $89 per megawatt hour. And in that study, we found that no nuclear power plants were built out. So it was actually in that study, it was the case that a combination of wind and solar and storage and other types of resources were just more economical for decarbonizing the grid. And the third study I have is from Evolved Energy Research. They do these annual decarbonization perspective studies. And in 2024, they actually kind of looked at this question backwards. They wanted to understand if nuclear were going to be built out at a large scale, if it were going to be a big part of the least cost decarbonization of the grid, what kind of price point would we need to get to? And they found that nuclear would need to achieve a levelized cost of energy between $47 and $59 per megawatt hour. So really the conclusion here is that the studies that we've seen so far indicate that the levelized cost of energy of nuclear would need to come down to around $60 per megawatt hour for it to play a big role in decarbonizing the grid at least cost. And currently, like I mentioned earlier, we're seeing prices far above $100 a megawatt hour. And one caveat I should mention here, when I was preparing this presentation, working with Dan at CEA, one of the things he asked me was whether if the price of other technologies actually went up, it was higher than expected, would that make a difference? And the answer is yes. Like the differential between nuclear and other technologies is ultimately the thing that's driving which technologies get selected in the least cost decarbonization. So it is the case that if other technologies came in more expensive, that could reduce the amount of cost decrease we'd need to see on nuclear. But even so, the levelized cost of energy currently is just far higher than what we would need to see for it to play a big role in decarbonizing the grid. Okay. Moving on to nuclear waste, safety, and security. If we can go to the next slide. The first thing I want to touch on is waste, and I'm going to touch on storage of nuclear waste and also reprocessing of nuclear waste. So just briefly, dry cask storage is one of the more common methods for storing nuclear waste at power plant sites, and it's a fine interim solution for now. But UCS is definitely of the position that storing waste in a deep geological repository is going to be the only acceptable long-term disposal method for high-level radioactive waste. And unfortunately, after the Yucca Mountain project was stopped, there hasn't been any further progress on a deep geological repository. So the prospects of having that kind of waste storage solution are not very bright, at least in the near term. And the photo you see there on the slide is actually a picture of the Yucca Mountain facility under construction. So on the storage piece, sorry, if we can go back, the other thing on nuclear waste is reprocessing of nuclear fuels. And I know that's come up in past conversations, so I wanted to touch on it as well. And UCS is actually opposed reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel, mostly over concerns around nuclear proliferation. So more specifically, when you reprocess nuclear fuels, you separate out the plutonium, and that can be used directly in making nuclear weapons. And we just think the risks around that are too high. But I also think it's worth highlighting that even if you were to pursue a large-scale reprocessing program for nuclear fuels, you would still produce high-level radioactive waste, and that waste would still require long-term storage. And just to illustrate that point, in France, where they have an extensive system for reprocessing their spent nuclear fuel, they're still pursuing the construction of a deep geological repository. So reprocessing is not a solution that would mitigate the need for some sort of long-term waste storage. That would still be the case, even if reprocessing were pursued. Okay, on the next slide, on the safety front, right here on this slide, we have a picture of the 3 Mile Island power plant, which is the site of the worst nuclear accident in US history. There's a lot I could say about safety, but I'm just going to focus now in this presentation on a few troubling trends we've seen about safety requirements, specifically for new nuclear reactor designs that have been proposed in the past decades. And just for example, we've seen many new nuclear reactor designs using passive safety systems, which could be an improvement, but they can still also fail in extreme conditions like earthquakes or flooding. We've also seen many reactors being designed with far less robust containment structures, which is very concerning. And we've also seen some developers of new nuclear designs seeking the elimination of requirements to establish off-site emergency planning zones. And when you put all that together, I think what it means is that the consequences are, if an accident were to occur at one of these new plants, the consequences could be much worse because of these safety measures that are being relaxed in some of these new reactor designs. And on the safety front, more specifically on when it comes to advanced reactors, just for reference, almost all of the reactors in the current fleet are light water reactors, which just means they're cooled by water. But there are new reactor designs that are cooled by other substances. Sodium is one example. And some of these new reactor designs, they may offer safety advantages, but they also have novel characteristics that could render them less safe than current designs. And just because these reactor designs are so new, we would really need further testing and real-world operational experience to confirm whether any safety claims about those are true or not. Okay, on the next slide, the third point I wanted to touch on here is security. And the first thing I wanted to say is also around advanced reactors. There's a particular concern around some of those new technologies where many of these new advanced reactor designs require nuclear fuel with higher levels of uranium enrichment. And what you see up on the screen here is a recent study in Science, including an author from UCS, that argued that this type of fuel with higher levels of uranium enrichment, it could actually be used directly in making nuclear weapons. And I think there's some more research that needs to be done on this, but it really casts doubt on whether such reactor designs should even be pursued. And if they were, I think it really highlights a need for instituting some more security around the fuel supply chain for those plants if they were ever to be built. And on the security front, just the last thing I'll say is we often think about nuclear power plant risks. We think about issues about earthquakes and flooding and other natural disasters, but I think it's important not to forget another type of risk that humans bring to the mix. There's always the risk of meltdowns, reactor meltdowns from like terrorist attacks or other types of things humans can do. And I think it's really hard to eliminate those kinds of risks, and sometimes even hard to plan for them. So that's just another type of risk. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but important to remember those kinds of risks as well. On the next slide, before we completely leave nuclear safety, security, I think it's important to mention in this day and age, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it has exclusive jurisdiction over the regulation of safety at nuclear power plants. And if you go to the next slide, we've seen the current federal administration really reshaping the NRC in not very positive ways. We've seen the president firing a commissioner, firing the chair, and appointing a different commissioner. We've seen the federal government instituting a process for White House review of all significant NRC rules, effectively stripping the NRC of its independence. And we've also seen the Energy Department very recently. We discovered they've been secretly rewriting some of the safety rules around new test reactors. And so I think taken together, all of this really, it calls into question the independence of the NRC. And I think it means we should think twice about whether this agency with exclusive jurisdiction over safety will really do an adequate job when its independence is in question. Okay, so I'll leave you with a few takeaways. The first bullet, if we can bring that up. As I mentioned earlier, we would really need to see major cost reductions in the cost of new nuclear technologies for them to play a role in least cost decarbonization of the electric grid. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a balance there between the costs of nuclear and other types of resources, but the costs of nuclear are currently quite high in comparison to what we think they would need to be for it to play a big role in decarbonization. The second point is that there are still quite significant challenges that persist around waste, safety, and security. And I'll leave it there. The third point, as I just mentioned, is that the independence of the NRC is in question. And as I said, I think we need to think twice about pursuing new nuclear technologies when that agency has sole jurisdiction over safety regulation. And finally, I didn't go into this in a lot of detail. I think we'll hear more about this later in the board meeting, but I think it's worth highlighting that there are other similar technologies that are far less risky that could play a similar role on the power grid. So here I have in mind something like geothermal, which can also operate most of the time. And so technologies like that just don't have all of these safety and security and waste risks that nuclear do. And so I think when you put all of this together with the really high costs and all the unique issues that face nuclear in particular around waste and safety and security, I do think it's kind of hard to rationalize pursuing new nuclear at this stage, especially when there are similar technologies that are far less risky that are also emerging and seeming quite promising. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. I imagine the board has questions. I had a quick one. You mentioned that major cost reductions wouldn't be seen in new nuclear, but how do you believe the role of current nuclear sites could benefit an agency like CEA?
So you're talking about existing nuclear power plants or building
Yes.
more new power plants with like older technologies?
Existing nuclear power.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a tricky question. The world of existing nuclear power near CEA is not super large. There's Diablo Canyon, there's Palo Verde, and so I suppose like getting a piece of those plants is always an option. I Diablo Canyon's the best candidate, just because of proximity and being in the state, but I feel like there's a whole different story around Diablo Canyon. UCS in particular has some concerns around the safety of that plant, especially earthquake safety at that plant. And so I think, like I mentioned earlier, UCS generally sees a role for existing nuclear plants to stay on the grid and continue operating to help decarbonize the grid, as long as those plants are safe. And that safety caveat is important, and I think is relevant to the case of Diablo Canyon at least. So I think that's how I'll answer that question for now.
Thank you, Mark, and we'll move down the line, Member Becker.
Thank you. Really interesting presentation. I appreciate you being here today. I was curious on the new legislation, the 2026 legislation. You talked about advanced reactors after 2005 might be eligible to come online, and I'm curious how many of those are there in California?
You mean how many?
What's the possibilities of that legislation? I mean, what are the ramifications of that legislation? Do we have to worry about a lot of these advanced reactors, or is it just like a small number, or?
So my understanding is that actually, I think this was from Dan at CEA, pointing out that the 2005 deadline allows one particular technology, the AP1000, which was the technology used at the Vogtle plant in Georgia. It allows that plant to qualify, or that technology to qualify. So I do think that I think the effect of that bill would be that basically conventional nuclear technologies, some conventional nuclear technologies, in addition to small modular reactors and some of these advanced reactor designs, potentially all of those would be allowed via that bill. But that again, that bill is it's quite new. I still need to dig in and do the research on it, but that is my initial understanding of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you. Mark, thank you so much for being here. This is very informative. I do appreciate your time and your knowledge. I do have a few questions for you. I think security and safety is a big concern for a lot of us, especially with safety. Can you cite current issues that we've seen with the with safety and potential hazard of different sites right now? I mean, other than potential or hypothetical, will you point to anything in the last, let's say, 10, 20 years that we've seen this?
Okay, sorry, there's just a little, it's not coming through completely clear, but the question was like, have we seen safety issues at existing plants in the past, like, recent decades?
In the last, let's say, decade, yeah. Any issues other than the one in Japan, but what other sites have we seen, at least in the country, that we've seen major hazard or safety issues?
Yeah, so for this one, I think I'd have to bring in my colleague who's more of an expert on this topic. I think though that at least when it comes to major things, I think you would have heard about it if it were really major. So I know like there are little incidents that have happened here and there, but they haven't resulted in like big releases of highly radioactive material or anything like that. So
Right, and that's why I asked, because you're exactly right, we know about the one in Japan, it was early 2010s.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking of anything else that we may not have heard of, given that maybe it didn't make national headlines.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy to follow up with my and get some wisdom from my colleague on that one if that'd be of interest. But I don't have like all the safety history at the tip of my fingers right now.
Yeah, that would be great, because I know that's a big concern of ours, that we really want to tackle. The other thing is, when you mentioned the NRC and the writing of the new rules and everything, how independent has the NRC been historically anyway?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think that is a good question. I think it's has not always been as independent as we would have liked to have seen. I think it's always yeah, I think there's always been some influence, but I think what we're seeing now is taking it to a whole nother level. And I think like firing commissioners, appointing people who you think will agree with whatever you want to happen politically. And in particular, the new process for White House review of major NRC rules, I think is another like big red flag. So I think you're right to say like maybe it hasn't always been like as independent, as perfectly independent as we all would like it to be, but I do think the recent developments like take that to the next level.
So I guess to follow up on that, and you just said it, is, new commissioners and new, writing of regulations or changing of regulations, is that new in any way? Because from my understanding is that's pretty common throughout past administrations.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to go back and look at the history. I don't know if actually firing commissioners and replacing them is
Sure.
very common. But
Sure.
I take your point. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure, because this is totally unprecedented, and obviously that's a big concern that I think we should all have. And then the last thing is, we're talking about the least cost in terms of carbon decarbonization. But one of the things that we also need to look at is scaling and volume. So in terms of scaling and volume compared to other forms of energy, how effective would nuclear be?
Can you say more about what you mean by scaling and volume?
Yeah, so there, if we're looking at nuclear, I mean, what's the potential of being able to increase, or to, let's say, to be able to provide energy for a large scale, let's say even like a city size. My city's 150,000 people, right? I mean, how feasible is it to use nuclear to power, let's say, a city of 150,000 versus other alternatives like wind or solar or anything?
I see. I see. Yeah, I mean, I think with some of the new nuclear technologies, there are some reactor designs that are much smaller and maybe would be more suited to powering smaller loads. So I think that is changing. Like the days of having reactors that are like a gigawatt minimum is definitely coming to an end. Um, at the same time, I think at least in comparison to other types of resources, uh, wind, solar, energy storage, those are all like very modular, and perhaps a little better suited to trying to meet exactly smaller electricity demands.
Right.
But there's a lot of caveats to that. So
Sure, and I just asked because I think, I'm sorry, CA seven cities, like. Yeah, so, we're several cities here in North County, and so if we're looking at something that's going to be able to support the grid or fill the grid, we obviously need to think large scale here, and not, something that would be, like you said, more modular. So I'm just trying to think of, what's something that's potentially be more effective than nuclear, given how much I think there's potential here. So I think that's really what I was getting to.
okay, yeah.
And thank you so much for your time again. I appreciate your answers. Yeah, if you could come back to us with those answers, those inquiries that I had, that'd be really helpful. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further questions, inquiry from the board? No, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Next, we'll move on to our next presentation, State of Geothermal Industry, bringing on Wilson Briggs and Ann Garth.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear us all?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having us. Next slide, please. So Ann and I are members of Clean Air Task Force, which is an NGO focused on addressing decarbonization as pragmatically as possible, primarily through the development and deployment of low carbon energy technologies and other climate technologies. Ann is a member of our geothermal team, and I'm a member of our electricity team. And we are here today to talk about geothermal power and its role in California and potentially your energy mix. Next slide. And I'm going to start by kind of exploring the status quo. Some of this is going to be kind of echoing what Mark presented earlier on the potential role of resources like geothermal and nuclear that provide round-the-clock generation. And I think it's important to compare them to what's currently receiving very large-scale deployment in California right now, which is solar and storage. And these resources are currently experiencing very large-scale deployment. They're currently very cost-effective. Solar is very cheap. California has some of the best solar resources in the world. And we've reached the point where battery costs have become low enough that they can cost-effectively push solar power into the evenings. And as we move farther and farther into California's decarbonization journey, pushing towards the 100% goal, the question becomes, how far can we go on this resource mix, and does there become a point where we need to diversify? Next slide. And if we look at solar power alone, I think it's obvious that we can't use 100% solar because it only provides power during the day. And California has actually already reached the point where it is frequently generating more solar power than it needs during daytime. And at the same time, we still see significant generation needs from non-solar resources, particularly in the evenings as the sun sets and ACs tend to ramp up. And of course, nighttime generation remains sourced from other resources. Of course, the solution to this is batteries. Next slide. Which are very, very well suited to addressing this peak, or this specifically this kind of large swing in availability of power, where we have significant solar supply during the day, followed by significant demand in the evenings as solar goes away. And when you start out with just this phenomenon, no batteries in the system, your first battery is extremely cost effective because it can buy energy for almost nothing in the middle of the day, sell it for a very high amount in the evening. And the amount of energy you need to store to reduce the height of that evening peak is fairly low because the peak is fairly sharp. As you move on and build more and more batteries in the system, next slide, you start to shave that peak. And the arbitrage spread for your batteries become lower. And if you want to shave that peak further, you now need to put in several more hours of storage because that peak is now long and flat. And eventually you get to a point, next slide, where you need longer and longer durations to successfully reduce the amount of generating capacity you need in the system to meet that peak demand. And of course, your batteries are making smaller and smaller revenues on the kind of daily arbitrage of the high solar hours to the low solar hours. And so this isn't to say that batteries can't continue to do this work. It's just that the batteries need to become progressively cheaper and almost exponentially so as you try to use them to cover more and more of your non-solar hours. Next. And so it becomes more difficult to rely exclusively on solar and storage to push beyond daytime and evening, especially when you get into the kind of extreme weather scenarios where you have several weeks of cloudy weather, and you need enough capacity to make it through those periods, but that's probably more capacity than you need at other times of the year. Next slide. And so that kind of phenomenon is really what's behind the fairly large number of analyses at this point, both from academia and industry, that have shown a need for clean, firm resources, and that those are resources that can provide carbon-free generation whenever needed, regardless of the weather, and for as long as needed. They include things like nuclear, geothermal, etc. And I want to direct your attention to this plot on the right here, which is from a multi-model study of SB 100 goals by a few academic institutions and E3, which conducts CAISO's resource planning every year. And using those models, there was a general consensus that to achieve the SB 100 target without any new clean, firm resources would require a absolutely enormous build out of primarily solar and storage, though out-of-state wind power could play a role. California tends to have very poor in-state wind quality. And that if there were clean, firm options available and available at commercially competitive costs, you could significantly cut that required capacity, that required build out, and ultimately achieve that goal much more cost effectively. As Mark was saying, that of course depends on the relative cost of the clean firm options compared to the solar and storage, but the amount of excess capacity that you avoid by deploying clean firm options means that they could still be fairly expensive and play a role in reducing overall system costs. And of course, as I mentioned, geothermal is one of the more promising clean firm options available. So I'm going to pass it off to Anne to give an intro of geothermal power specifically.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wilson. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So good to meet you all. And yes, really happy to share a little bit about geothermal today. So at the sort of highest level, in order to produce geothermal power, you need three things in place. You need heat, you need water to transfer that heat from the rock to the surface, and you need permeability, which is a fancy word for little pathways or cracks in the rock that the water can travel through. And for a long time, the only way to produce geothermal was when all three of those factors happen to naturally occur in the same place together. We call that conventional or hydrothermal geothermal systems, where you've got these pockets of hot water that, water's already present in the subsurface, and you can use that to produce power. And that's great when you have it, but it's not something that is a major player in the energy system because it is pretty rare that you have all three of those factors in place in the same location. And so that's a form of power that is not a major contributor to the energy mix. Fast forward to about 15 years ago, and innovations and developments in technology enabled the production of what we call next generation geothermal. And for next generation geothermal, instead of looking for heat and water and permeability all in the subsurface, you're just looking for heat. And you can bring your own water and you can create your own permeability and produce power that way. And as you can imagine, it's much easier to find hot rocks than to find hot rocks plus water plus permeability. So that really dramatically expands the option set for the role that geothermal can play in the energy system. And as we continue to advance and get to hotter temperatures of next generation geothermal, including what we call super hot, which is the highest temperature form of next gen, the energy density is going to continue to rise, and that will ultimately make projects even more affordable. And so continued innovation will make geothermal an even better option. So there are a lot of different nuances of that. There's different types of next generation systems. You may have heard of EGS or enhanced geothermal systems. You may have heard of closed loop systems. There's lots of different approaches, but at a very high level, that's sort of an overview of how it works. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about California. California has some of the best geothermal resources in the country. The largest conventional geothermal plant in the world is in the geysers in California. There's also a lot happening at the Salton Sea, and there is potential to expand that development. But ultimately, the real growth area for geothermal in California is in that next generation space. And you can do that near the existing conventional geothermal resources where the subsurface is already very well mapped. Or you can expand to other parts of the state where there hasn't been conventional geothermal, but there is a really good resource potential. And as you can see on the map there, huge parts of California are in that red color, indicating a really high resource potential. And if you'll go to the next slide to put some numbers on what really high resource potential means, CHEF did some modeling of super hot rock, so the highest temperature form of next generation geothermal. And our modeling indicated that just 1% of California's super hot rock resource could produce as much as around 380 gigawatts of energy. A lot of that is not accessible at current, at least not economically, at current technology levels because it's very deep and drilling is expensive. So this is not meant to indicate something that's going to be possible within the next year or two, but rather just to give you a sense of the long-term value proposition of geothermal and in the medium to long term, what it would look like for California to really take advantage of the available resources could absolutely change the state's energy system in a really serious way. And even if we just limit ourselves to the geothermal that is possible at depths that are accessible in that sort of 5 to 7.5 range or even shallower, there's a huge amount of energy available there that is absolutely accessible with current technologies. So if you go to the next slide. So what is the geothermal state of play in California? There is all this potential, is it being realized? There is some conventional hydrothermal development activity in the Salton Sea. The thing that's important to note about conventional geothermal is that because you're looking for a pocket of hot water, there is always the chance that you will drill down to where you think that pocket of hot water is and find out that your estimate was a little bit wrong and you're, right next to that pocket, but not actually in that pocket. And that will cause the costs to go dramatically higher. You may just have to abandon that well entirely. And so the uncertainty around the resource creates financial risk, which increases costs of capital. And that's just a general barrier that hydrothermal projects face. In California in particular, development in the Salton Sea is additionally a little bit challenging because in the Salton Sea area, that water has been sitting in the subsurface for hundreds or thousands of years, picking up minerals from the surrounding rock. Some of those minerals are lithium, which is obviously very valuable and something that you can get out of your geothermal fluid and sell, which is fantastic. But some of the other minerals are less valuable and can just kind of muck up your turbines and corrode your surface equipment, which can increase costs. So as I said before, next generation geothermal is the real growth potential for California, although it would be great if more conventional geothermal developed. When it comes to next generation geothermal, the most of the next generation geothermal currently being developed in the US is happening in Utah and Nevada. There are not any currently active projects in California. The projects in Utah and Nevada are selling to the California market. So for instance, Fervo Energy is the developer of the largest next generation geothermal project in the world. That's a 500 megawatt project in Utah. And almost all of that is contracted with Southern California utilities. So it is meeting demand in California, but is being produced primarily out of state. And there are plenty of reasons for why there hasn't been more in-state development. The two that I'll mention here are lack of sort of mapping or characterization of the subsurface to inform, siting of projects, as well as uncertainty and, slower timelines on the regulatory and permitting side. CATF has published a report about barriers to geothermal development in California that has much more detail on that last bullet point. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'll just turn it back over to Kasparis at this point.
Thanks, Anne. Great. Way ahead of me. So just to give a kind of overview of the current state of play in next generation geothermal technology, I think one thing that's important to note is this is very new. No one had really ever produced a large scale next generation geothermal power plant before the current undertaking in Utah. And there's been a lot of progress in making this cost effective. Obviously, we still haven't achieved first power, but the drilling costs alone at the Cape Station project, which is Fervo's next generation project out in Utah, have come down dramatically over the course of that project, and really beat what were kind of prior estimates of what could be expected in the hard rock drilling that you focus on in geothermal power. They've also done a really good job at producing engineering reservoirs that can actually produce the flow rates necessary to achieve economical geothermal power generation. And beyond this kind of what's currently under development, there are also companies that like Quaise that are exploring and making significant progress in even greater leaps in drilling technology. So for example, energy-based drilling, which could be a solution to getting to the extreme depths that are needed to unlock the super hot, super critical resources that we think could enable much, much more cost-effective generation. Next slide. And as a result of all of this new activity, I think one just indicator of where sentiment is about the direction of next generation geothermal power is that geothermal lease prices, which had for a long time been very, very low, have exploded in the last few years. So this is an indicator that there's belief out there, at least among people investing in these auctions, that next generation geothermal is progressing from a technology demonstration phase into a large scale potential growth phase, which would be, I think, defined by land ownership in the same way that there was a rush to buy land and mineral rights after the invention or the development of fracking technology in the oil and gas industry. So this is a positive sign of sentiment. Next slide. And in terms of the potential for next generation geothermal to actually meet demand, especially in the near term in places like Southern California, I want to first note conventional power, which continues to be built. These resources are, we still have unexploited conventional geothermal resources in the US. I believe Google just signed a contract for 150 megawatts of conventional geothermal power in Nevada. Just the other week. So this is definitely something where there's still activity, though project sizes tend to be small because the resources tend to be small and kind of bespoke and scattered. And there are only a few sites left where there is very, very large scale potential. Again, the Salton Sea is one. And if you look at this map on the right, there's actually a lot of next generation projects that are currently in either the planning phase or the development phase. Mostly out of California. The biggest one to take note of is Fervo's Cape Station project, which is targeting 100 megawatts by the end of this year. And eventually another 400 megawatts by, I think, 2029. And if we assume that those projects go smoothly, you'll notice that development timeline for that 400 megawatts is only about 3 or 4 years. And so if we can extrapolate that, that's a much faster development timeline than, for example, large nuclear plants tend to be. And it's quite possible that we could see several gigawatts of next generation geothermal deployment by 2035, especially if other players jump into the game. And one kind of factor that's going to allow that expansion is that next generation geothermal drilling is essentially a one-to-one reapplication of technologies and workforces from the oil and gas industry. So those supply chains, those workforces can be directly reapplied to drilling geothermal wells instead of oil and gas wells, which is probably the best energy workforce transition scheme you can imagine. The main limiter will honestly probably be the surface turbines, where there are still established industries that can be scaled up. So next slide. The main upshot from all this is that the need for geothermal power is likely to increase over time in California as the solar and storage build out continues and as it becomes harder and harder to decarbonize the next megawatt hour with that combination of technologies. So the value is going to rise over time for geothermal, and its availability is also likely to increase substantially over the next 5 to 10 years, again, assuming that the demonstration projects scheduled for the next year or so go smoothly. So that combination is hopefully going to raise the salience of geothermal as a potential option for CEA and other California utilities. I think that's the end for us, so happy to take questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Wilson and Ann. Any questions from the board? It was very informative. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you all.
Wonderful. Next, we'll move on to our consent calendar. Do we have any speakers for consent calendar?
We don't have any speakers for consent.
Okay. I would ask for a motion to approve items 1 and 2 on our consent calendar. Motion by Vice Chair. Second by Becker. Please vote.
Board Member Spillage.
Aye.
Board Member Nunez.
Aye.
Board Member Baltasar.
Aye.
Board Member Becker.
Yes.
Board Member Figueroa.
Aye.
Vice Chair Garcia.
Yes.
Chair Melendez.
Aye. Now we'll move on to our reports, starting with our CEO report from our CEO, Greg Wade.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Having difficulty advancing these slides here. Okay, sorry about that. So just a brief update on our enrollment statistics. You can see here, we're now enrolled at just over 256,000 customer accounts across our seven member agencies, and an average of 93% participation. And again, you can see our default product as by far the highest enrollment, with just over 254,000 accounts. And it's nice to see our green impact slowly moving up as well at 1,464 accounts. Just an overview on some of the community events that we've completed recently. You can see them there. We're trying to get out as we've advised the board to all our member agencies, cities and communities to provide some of these outreach events. One of note is the top one, the Smartphone Battery Tour. Just an interesting note that they're just around the corner from our offices in Carlsbad, and it's a really interesting technology. Unfortunately, not one that is likely to take off anytime soon in California. However, it's a process by which they take used electric vehicle batteries and assemble them into battery storage facilities, which is a really interesting technology, and hopefully has some more benefit in years to come. These are the events that are coming up, and as you can see, as we head into the month of April, we've got several events coming up throughout our service territory in March, including to highlight a sponsorship night at Front Wave Arena on March 27th. So that's an event that we're looking forward to, as well as all the Earth Day events that will be taking place throughout the county, and particularly in our service territory in April. So again, our staff is highly engaged in outreach and engagement with our community members, and this is indicative of those efforts. Just an update on where we stand with Solar Plus and Battery Bonus and the Connect programs. The Connect programs, again, are the SCHIP funded programs. You can see here that we're up to 29 Solar Plus applicants, 10 completed. Solar Plus Connect, 34 applications, We're starting to roll those out now, having only recently received or have been cleared at the end of last year for the expenditure of those funds, receipt of those funds. And on the battery bonus side, we're at 58 applications. And I believe, I don't know if this has been, I had understood that some had been actually completed at this point. This just shows again the breakdown in SDRIP funding, and it's a good distribution of those funds throughout our service territory. And again, it took some work on staff's part and our partnership with Haven and Participate Energy to have these funds allocated to our members in the community who are eligible for this SDRIP funding. Our Peak Smart Savers participants, we're still creeping up slowly, and the number of those participants, we're now up to 49. And again, this is our demand response program that we've talked about at past board meetings. Just wanted to highlight that our staff, although it was officially canceled because the state assembly happened to schedule a retreat on the day, February 4th, where members of Cal CCA's, various CCAs, as well as our own staff, attended Lobby Day in any event, as we had already planned meetings with our staff of our representatives. You can see here a picture of the group that attended Lobby Day for on behalf of Cal CCA and our member agencies. I would emphasize that the focal point of our discussions, as you are well aware, was on affordability, but another focus was on transparency with calculations, particularly the power charge and difference adjustment and the methodology for calculating and establishing those PCIA and other rates. We were, as a group, looking for authors during that visit and continue to look for authors for legislation on both the transparency and our resource adequacy transactability question. We are looking to be able to transact RA on an hourly basis, much in line with the slice of day platform that is now required. And the good news is that we did get authors for both those legislative priorities. Rogers from Northern California has authored Assembly Bill 1761. It's a transparency bill that requires, if adopted, the IOUs to make information and calculations for anything that would affect race available to the CCAs as well as to interest groups in those proceedings. And then Senate Bill 1138, authored by our local Senator Padilla, is a bill that would, as I mentioned, provide for that ability to transact resource adequacy on an hourly basis. Just a recruitment update. We are actively recruiting for 5 positions. You see them listed there. There were a lot of applications. As you can see, we've highlighted the number of applications we received. That's the good news. We have scheduled interviews for next week. They're taking place, I believe, on every day next week, and we have a good pool of candidates to interview, and eager to see what comes out of that. So that concludes the CEO's report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Any questions from the board? Member Venus?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions. I just want to give a shout out to Greg. Thank you for coming out to our City of San Marcos City Council this past Tuesday. You gave a very comprehensive, great presentation and very informative. I know our residents are very concerned about the state of affairs and the costs for their utility bills. So I really appreciate you coming out and updating our residents in San Marcos. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And I would also like to mention that on that day that we sent out, or Anna sent out the packages the information that we had promised on the rate relief credit, as well as other programs that are still widely available through either us or SDG&E for those people and customers who are looking for rate relief or other affordability programs.
Fantastic. All right, seeing no further comments, we'll continue to move along. to our work plan overview. Do we have any speakers on these items?
We don't have any speakers on item 3 or 4.
All right, we'll go ahead and receive your presentation, Greg.
Thank you. Again, this is the work plan overview. It's a 2-year work plan. This work plan was, well, first of all, it's based on our strategic plan, which this board, our first strategic plan approved by the board on April 24th last year. And the work plan is the plan that implements the strategic plan that was approved on June 26th of last year. As you may recall, the strategic plan established 6 core guiding principles and goals and objectives within each of those. And the work plan sets forth implementation measures and other objectives along with key performance indicators to track progress on implementation of the plan. So as a reminder, these are the 6 core guiding principles to promote and use development of clean energy, to build and maintain financial stability within the organization, provide beneficial customer programs, to actively engage in customer advocacy, and to provide exceptional customer service and community engagement, and finally to promote organizational development. So taking each one of these were the objectives found and the key performance indicators in the work plan. I'm not going to go over each one of them specifically in the interest of time. You can see here that we do have a focus on the use and development of clean energy, and of course, trying to reach our 100% renewable energy goal by 2035. So looking at the accomplishments of this over the last calendar year and moving into the beginning of this year, CEA is contracted for 160 megawatts of new solar in 2025, 194 megawatts of new energy storage in 2025. We added 1 new member agency in the Carlsbad and 5 new Green Impact Champions to our 100% renewable energy. And as I mentioned in the CEO report, we secured over $2 million in SGIP funding to provide residential and solar systems as well as battery systems to existing solar for income eligible residents. And of course, recently the board approved this Solar Plus business program, which is modeled after our other Solar Plus residential program. And the Solar Plus business program will be launched this year and targets governmental and business owners who would like to install solar, battery, or just battery backup storage. The next core guiding principle to build and maintain financial stability. And again, much of this, if I had to summarize these bullet points, is to get it to a place of financial stability and security sufficient to seek a credit rating, which will help us in procurement efforts to have that credit rating. So that's a key goal for us, and we've spoken quite a bit about that in our rate relief discussions, credit discussions. So the accomplishment so far is that we have a change of net position through December of last year of $58 million. Our net position reached an all-time high at the end of December of $79.3 million. Our days liquidity on hand exceeded 100 days at 118 days, and we are still on track to seek an investment-grade credit rating in 2028, which had been our goal. That's even with the projections we have forecasted with the rate relief credit that we have rolled out for the benefit of customers who choose to take advantage of that, which is the next item we did. We also launched our demand response program. The pilot program has been extended into a second year, our Peak Smart Savers program. And then recently we amended a power purchase agreement, one of our the largest ever with Darden, 139 megawatts of solar and storage. And we extended that term from 10 to 12 years, which has a potential savings of $1.4 million per year. So all of which is underscoring this key goal for us as a going concern. Of course, one of our goals is to provide beneficial customer programs, and I highlighted where we are with those during the CEO report. So as previously mentioned, we adopted the Peak Smart Demand Response Program. We're up to 29 solar plus applicants, 10 of which have been completed. We began and completed the survey and outreach for our energy programs plan. Our SCHIP funded Connect programs were implemented last year. We implemented our Solar Plus Connect with 34 applicants currently, and just sort of the goal that we put in the work plan of 50 to 100 customers. We're still working on that. The good news on the Battery Bonus Connect program is that we surpassed our goal of 50 customers. We had 58 applicants and 40 installations, which is what I alluded to earlier, where I believe that was not included in the CEO report. And then again, to repeat, we approved our Solar Plus business program last year. Looking at our customer advocacy, we've been actively involved in this effort to advocate on behalf of our customers. We're about to see our regulatory update that will touch on some of the advocacy work we're doing. And just as the highlights, and there are quite a few of them, we did engage with a legislative lobbyist up in Sacramento, Summit Advocacy, has been providing good support for us. We became a member of the Local Energy Aggregation Network, LEAD, which provides federal advocacy and support. We're actively engaged, as I just mentioned, with Keys and Fox in our CPUC regulatory matters, as well as the Cal CCA. And we've listed here several of the successes that were a result of that advocacy. For example, getting the PCIA as a volumetric line item on bills for bundled customers, and also to break it out in the unbundled customers. So we secured a scoping item on SDG's bundled procurement plan for compliance and excess RA sales, which is critical for us to review our SDG's RA sales practices. We want access to SDG's ERA forecast internal control documents, again, which helps us to review the calculation of their balancing accounts, improving transparency into PCIA eligible resource accounting. And while there's still ways to go, and that's the basis of the PCIA legislation I referred to earlier, this was a key step forward. And then, of course, has been reported at several of our board meetings later on the proceeding for PCIA proceeding. We were able to successfully get the fair resource renewable energy certificate valuation for now departed customers. So that was a key success in that proceeding, which is still ongoing. On the exceptional service to our community and community engagement, this is an effort, or an area rather, that we are actively involved in. As presented in the CEO report, we've been working on our energy programs plan. We continue to get our community, our staff and members of our CAC out into the community to meet with folks. Here you see a breakdown of the outreach events that we participated in. In particular, I'd like to highlight the energy programs plan. We had 8 workshops conducted throughout the service territory, 6 of which were bilingual, and we got a really good response with over 200 people participating in those workshops. As you can see, there are 64 outreach events in calendar year 25. We recently distributed, we're working on a toolkit. We distributed the toolkit for our rate relief credit, as well as our affordability programs and SDGs affordability programs that went out this week. And we're working on an online bill comparison tool. It's actually ready to go, but we're waiting for the rates that were created by the rate relief credit to be factored in before we put it on our website. And we're doing the interaction of an educational scavenger hunt to win tickets at Front Wave Arena to Clippers and soccer games. So hopefully we'll get some engagement with our customers in that way. And then, as I also reported in the CEO report, on the organizational development front, last year we hired 5 new employees. We are actively recruiting 5 more in this current year, and we are our staff is actively engaged in what are called tiger teams at Cal CCA. These are a variety of different target areas within the CCA world. You have regulatory and legislative tiger teams, you have procurement tiger teams, resource planning, and those kinds of things. And our staff is actively involved. Some staff members are on several of these tiger teams, so it's a lot of work, but that helps us keep up to date on what's going on. And then, of course, we attend regularly webinars, conferences, and the like to get our staff educated and, as I said, current on matters that are affecting the energy world and CCA. So that's how we've been doing. The recommendation here just is to receive this report. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions in how we might, tackle additional items on the work plan, happy to hear.
Thank you, Greg. Very thorough review of our work plan. Any questions, comments from the board? No, we all appreciate the work that you and our staff are doing, and I believe that those slides would be beneficial for the public, so I'm glad that that's being presented in the public meeting as well. Next, we'll move on to new business, our regulatory update. We have Jacob on the call.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes,
Great.
we can.
Okay, and yeah, there we go. Great. Good afternoon, Chair Melendez, Vice Chair Garcia, members of the board. My name is Jake Schlesinger, partner at Keys and Fox. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present again to you. Moving on to the next slide, please. Today, I'm going to be presenting on 3 new CPUC proceedings that were each filed by SDG&E within the last several months. Each of these was filed sometime between December 1st and now. In each of these proceedings, CEA either already has filed or is planning to file a protest and to actively engage. And CEA is doing that jointly with San Diego Community Power in each of these proceedings. So I'll provide an overview of each of these applications and explain our concerns and why we're getting involved. Next slide, please. So the first new proceeding is SDG&E's application for demand flexible rates. SDG&E is proposing optional day-ahead hourly pricing for commodity rates. Those are generation rates. Their proposal also includes time of use rates for the transmission component of rates and a location-based distribution pricing. So that means distribution pricing based on where a customer is located on the grid and whether that area of the grid is constrained. SDG&E notes that the benefits of demand flexible rates, like these day-ahead rates, can include more economically efficient load shifting in response to the hourly supply and demand and how that changes from day to day. This can create potential for customers to reduce bills, and it can support grid reliability by using price signals to shift load from periods of high demand to periods of relatively lower demand. Now, it's important to note that SDG&E filed these demand flexibility rates under protest. They asked the commission multiple times to be relieved of this requirement, but the commission required it anyhow. SDG&E stated that it doesn't believe that this is the most cost-effective or prudent use of resources to go through this exercise of establishing these rates. And one of the reasons that they oppose it is because they note that the most significant day-ahead price signal, as I mentioned before, comes from the commodity component. That's because generation fluctuates, the cost of generation fluctuates from day to day and hour to hour. As you know, of course, 80% of SDG&E's customers, however, receive their generation commodity service from CCAs or other load-serving entities. So SDG&E argues that less than 20% of its customers will have access to the full savings potential of demand flex rates. And they note that the CCAs in its territory, SDCP and CEA, are not planning to offer demand flex rates. And they state that is due to design complexity, cost effectiveness, and lack of customer interest. But that's not really a complete statement of the CCA concerns. It's somewhat misleading. The real issue that we have with regard to offering, or that CEA has with being able to offer demand flexibility rates is access to data. CCAs currently receive meter data from its customers days after it's been recorded. In contrast to SDG&E being able to look at that meter data almost instantaneously. So that makes it very hard for CCAs to accurately predict day-ahead customer demand and set day-ahead pricing, or to evaluate the effectiveness of prior day-ahead pricing that it might set. So the CCAs have made this point repeatedly over the years, that they need timely access to data in order to be able to offer these types of dynamic rights. And the Commission has recognized that. They recognized that explicitly in a 2023 decision in which SDG&E had proposed a real-time pricing pilot. So basically our position in this proceeding is that SDG&E kind of misses the main point. It's not that we don't support this idea, it's that we don't have the data that we need to be able to do it. And so we'll be addressing that directly in this proceeding. Next slide, please. So this is related and also has to do with data access. SDG&E is also requesting authority to upgrade its advanced metering infrastructure. They want to replace their current Smart Meter 1.0 system, which was installed back in 2009 to 2011, with new technology, which is called Smart Meter 2.0. And this is going to cost approximately $825 million, which they'll seek to recover through delivery rates, which will be paid for by both CCA and bundled customers between 2024 and 2031. So like I said, our main interest in this proceeding has to do with data access, and there's really two main sub-issues related to data access. The first is customer data access, and the second is data parity for CCAs and other load-serving entities. So with regard to the first issue, our position is that customers need real-time access to their meter data to be able to really make use of it, to be able to actually respond to real-time or day-ahead pricing, like the demand flex rates I was just talking about, to be able to most effectively respond to demand response programs, or to be able to program their appliances to automatically respond to price signals, to maximize renewable energy utilization to the extent that they might be self-generating. And so they need to be able to provide that information. They need to be able to access that information themselves. They also need to be able to provide that information to their authorized third parties, their vendors, their solar installers, their battery installers, their demand response providers. And it's critical to note that the Commission has already required this type of real-time customer data access. That was a condition of the Commission's approval of the Smart Meter 1.0 investment. But currently, most customers in the San Diego area do not have access to this real-time data. And so our message to the Commission is to make sure that if they're going to do this very large investment, that they make sure that that data access is available. And then similarly, that data access is available to CCAs as well, in part for the reasons I just described previously with regard to the demand flex rates, but also, to make general procurement decisions, to design other types of customer-facing programs that might be time-dependent and try to take advantage of time of use rates, things like EV charging programs, or other kinds of demand response programs that Greg was just talking about. And all of this, of course, eventually impacts the load that the CCA has to serve and the procurement that it needs to make in order to meet its RA obligations. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the final new application that I want to talk about is SDG&E's application for the Palomar Decarbonization Project, in which SDG&E is requesting $20 million for the Palomar Decarbonization Demonstration Project. This is a hydrogen project that will be at the Palomar Energy Center, which is a natural gas generation facility that SDG&E owns and was completed in about 2006. So it's a 2006 vintage plant. And that is important because it means that all CEA customers who departed SDG&E service well after 2006 pay for that resource through the PCIA. The purpose of this project, according to SDG&E, is to demonstrate renewable hydrogen use for generator cooling, for cooling the plant, for generating power, literally using the hydrogen to generate power, to fuel its fleet vehicles, and then for additional research, demonstration, and deployment. And so CEA and SDCP are intervening in this proceeding to ensure that this project doesn't violate the indifference principle. In short, to make sure that CCA customers aren't paying for generation resources that aren't being acquired or aren't being used to meet CCA loads. And so what I'm referencing here is called the indifference principle. I talked to you all about this months ago with regard to a project at Miramar in which they sought to add a battery to a natural gas facility. But the basic idea of the indifference principle is that departed customers should not bear additional cost responsibility for new IOU generation investments and commitments that are made after those CCA customers depart. And this is a very kind of well-established CCA principle. The indifference principle is stated throughout California law and commission decisions. I gave you one example here on the slide from a 2008 decision. But the way that this works in practice is through this concept of vintaging, where a plant is vintage to a particular year and a departed customer is vintage to a particular year. And so customers that depart in that particular year shouldn't be responsible for generation plant that is invested in after the year that they depart. So the question, though, is what happens when a utility like SDG&E invests new money in an old plant, in this case, a 2006 plant like Palomar? The commission has addressed this also numerous times. Back in 2018, it stated that it is possible that new investments in an old power plant may represent a significant overhaul of the facility as to justify revintaging the facility. And it's also possible that plant investments for certain upgrades may justify a new vintage treatment for those new investments in the underlying facility. And so basically our protest and our interest in this proceeding is to stay true to that principle, to make sure that departed customers don't bear cost responsibility for these new generation facility commitments, to ensure that there's no cost shifting between bundled and unbundled customers. So that is it. You can flip to the next slide if you like. That's just my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of that.
Thank you, Jacob. Would we have any questions from the board or any public comments on this item?
We don't have any public comments on this item.
I don't see any questions from the board at this time, but thank you so much for joining us and for your updates. All right, to close our meeting, we will look ahead to our next meeting on March 26th here at Wikidia Wastewater District. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Yeah.